He's a Republican from North Carolina and chairman of the Conservative Freedom Caucus. Congressman, thank you for joining us today here.
It's great to be with you.
Thank you. Have you seen the bill? Have you seen anything, any text from your colleagues in the Senate yet?
We have not seen the full text. I can tell you, as you mentioned, they're doing a briefing right now. I've had conversations with some of the senators in the upper chamber about what is to be in that. Even the legislative text is not necessarily being shared with them at this moment. I can tell you that, the president's right. It's all about having heart and making sure that we take care of those pre-existing conditions, make sure it's properly funded, and bringing down premiums. It is going to change, and I think the debate that will happen over the next 48 hours is what's in it, what's not in it. Will conservatives, will moderates revolt? And I can tell you that for the last 3 weeks, we've been working very closely with our Senate colleagues to try to make sure that it accomplishes those first two priorities. But the other part of that is that perhaps through amendments that we can give consumers a better choice, where if they want the Obamacare plan, they can keep it. But the other part of that is that they actually get something that drives their premiums down.
So that's your initial reaction then, Congressman. So let me drill down into some of this here, because you talk about will conservatives revolt. And I think when people ask that question, they are frankly talking about your caucus, the House Freedom Caucus.
I think they are, and so that would be accurate.
So big picture, do you think that if these reports are accurate, that the Freedom Caucus and other conservatives in Congress will revolt?
Well, I don't see us revolting at this point. One, we're not rushing to judgment, and I think that's what we've done in the past. But here's one of the interesting things. Senator Ted Cruz has an amendment that we've talked about for many weeks called the Consumer Choice Amendment. If that ends up in this final bill, it actually takes some of the sting out of some of the other things. I can tell you with Medicaid expansion and the wind down that we're doing, we've actually been supportive all along. We've understood that some states expanded, others did not. We just want to make sure we're fair with both of those states. And so we've tried to take a more pragmatic approach, principled but pragmatic.
Let me ask you about that, because that's something else I want to ask you about. The Senate bill does look like, at least from initial reports now, it's going to more gradually phase out the Medicaid expansion. That is not something you wanted to see in the House version. So are you cool with that?
Well, we've been working with Senator Daines and a few other senators who actually expanded Medicare. North Carolina did not. I just want to make sure that our state doesn't get hurt for taking a principled stand many years ago. But at the same time, we understand that we can't create a crisis for anybody. So working with on a wind down is probably not as problematic for members of the Freedom Caucus as the other side of that, and it's about driving down premiums for you and me and everybody else.
So then when we talk about potential deal breakers, if that's not one of them, let me ask you about this, because the New York Times had a big splash on this, right? The House bill banning the use of federal tax credits to buy health plans that include abortion coverage. This could become a real flashpoint because there's talk that is not going to fly in the Senate. Is that a deal breaker for you?
Well, I think they're trying certainly it's a deal breaker for many conservatives, because that is a critical point. The Planned Parenthood language is probably more of a deal breaker than some of the other aspects. I think they're changing the tax credits, from what I read and from what I'm hearing, to actually address the pro-life provisions in a lot of that through other means. But the Planned Parenthood aspect, if that is pulled out, there would not be enough votes in the House to pass it. We've communicated that with our Senate colleagues, and looking forward to seeing the final text here in just a few minutes.
Just a couple of minutes here. A lot of what the discussion about this Senate bill from the White House, which is sort of my other day job, is from President Trump talking about making this Senate bill nicer, more heart.
Right.
Was your bill, was your version mean? Do you think it was mean?
Well, listen, you can characterize it a number of ways. I think one of the things, and I talked to the president personally.
That's not a no.
Well, I talked to the president personally about that, and what he was talking about is making sure that we have enough funding for those high-risk pools so that we don't leave anybody out of that. I agree that, we could bump up that spending. Actually was open on record to say that we could potentially bump up that funding for the pre-existing conditions and high-risk pools. And so I think that's what he was addressing, and so hopefully we'll get there. In fact, I'm confident we will get there because the next 14 to 21 days, we're going to put something on the president's desk to make sure that we finally repeal Obamacare and make health care affordable again.
2 more quick ones for you. You talk
Sure.
about 14 to 21 days getting something on the president's desk.
Right.
That seems like a very abbreviated time frame for something that's going to affect 23 million Americans. Are you comfortable with getting this done in 2 weeks?
Well, it's actually affecting 318 million Americans. It's not just 23 million Americans. You're talking about the CBO score.
I'm talking about, sure.
And
I
so
take
really,
your point. Bottom line, though, time frame, is it too rushed? Are you comfortable that Americans are going to have enough time and you to digest this in 2 weeks?
Well, I can tell you that I don't vote on any bill unless I read it, which was also true with the House bill. So we've got to digest it. But we've been having this debate, Hallie, as you know, for 7 years. And as we look at this, we've got to make sure that what we do is make a principled but pragmatic and realistic decision to lower health care prices. We have insurance providers bailing out of state after state after state. We've got to fix it now. Time is not our friend. And so, it's not a crisis. This is not a surprise.
Right.
We've got to make some decisions now.
What's the one thing that's going to be a deal breaker for you and your caucus? What's the one thing that if the Senate does, you are not going to be able to support?
Well, the one thing which has been the litmus test from day one is about premiums coming down. If premiums don't come down, there will not be the votes from the House Freedom Caucus. We have said that from February when our plan rolled out. We didn't think it did enough. We are all about lowering premiums. So if it doesn't do that, that's a deal buster, and we need to go back to the drawing table.
Sure are a lot of ways to get there. Congressman Mark Meadows, thank you very much. I appreciate you being here, and we're going to want to check back in with you in about 40 minutes.
That would be great.